What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some hidden gems that I have played and reviewed this year, because as I mentioned in a video just a few days ago, most of what I reviewed this year was in fact smaller titles as well as indies just across the board really, mainly due to a lot of the bigger releases that I was looking forward to getting pushed out to 2025. And while I've already discussed a lot of the really great indie titles I've played, the sort of cream of the crop, reality is those are names you likely already know for one reason or another. But really there were so many indies this year, and just smaller titles in general, that I wanted to shine a light on because I thought they were really great, even if they didn't receive nearly as much of a critical reception as those other ones. Now that's not to say any of these games are perfect. In fact, some of them have quite a bit of jank to them, and if you're willing to put up with that, I think each of these games can provide a really great experience, which might be something to consider over a slower holiday period as we wrap up what's left of the bigger releases for the year. But with no further ado, let's actually dive into this one. So kicking it off, we had a couple of titles real early in the year that I thought were pretty great, starting with Sovereign Syndicate. So Sovereign Syndicate is a narrative title. In particular, this one took a lot of inspiration from Disco Elysium. And seeing how we're unlikely to get another Disco Elysium type of game anytime soon, this is something you might want to consider. So this one is set in a Victorian steampunk London, mixed naturally with fantasy, of course. And what's really cool about this one is just the fantasy world that it is set in. In fact, one of my favorite things about it were the Minotaurs. This game has a lot of different Minotaurs that are, or at least can be, well-spoken and well-versed in all walks of life really, but due to their appearance, are met with no small amount of prejudice. And so as a result of this, many of them have mastered illusion magic to conceal their true nature, with some even using it to go into politics, which I thought was especially funny. Overall, though, I'd say what I really enjoyed about this was its relatively down-to-earth take for a setup like this. None of it feels so fantastical or out of reach as to be silly or unobtainable. If anything, it feels like they really thought about what a world like this might look like and tried to write that, which is why I think a lot of the characters, at least for me, really stood out, which is exactly what you want from a narrative title like this. So if you're looking for something that's a little lighter on gameplay, but still has a really interesting world to show off, then I think Sovereign Syndicate might be for you. Next up, though, early in the year as well, we had Zoria, Age of Shattering. So Zoria is, I would say, a CRPG, but it's one of those games that kind of straddles the line between CRPG and TRPG, which you'll see a fair few of if you get really deep into the genre, as they both tend to share a lot of qualities. And while I would be the first to tell you that Zoria is a very janky experience, it's also a very ambitious one. It's trying to do a lot of stuff, down to like base building and team building mechanics, mixed in with things like exploration and side quests, etc. Truth be told, I think this game might have suffered a bit from an overall lack of proper direction. And yet, in spite of that, it still manages to be quite a bit of fun, with pretty much every system it has working for it, while not necessarily being exactly a picture-perfect example of quality and depth. There is just enough to each one of them to be decently engaging for what a game like this is. Put all that together and you've got a game that, while I sincerely doubt it will top anybody's Game of the Year lists, was still quite a bit of fun, and I'd recommend checking it out to anybody who just so happens to have like $20 laying around. Which brings us to our third entry. For this one, we've got Rogue Waters, a much more recent TRPG that puts us in the role of a supernatural pirate brought back from the dead to both seek revenge, but also enact the will of a sea goddess to stop your former captain. And we're going to do this by engaging in various battles. This game is both a roguelike and a TRPG. And so each run we're going to be taking our ship against hosts of other ships, as well as even the occasional like port or dock that you'll have to fire against. And combat can basically be divided into two things: the actual ship-to-ship combat and then the proper turn-based battles. Together, I would say that makes Rogue Waters a game that knows exactly what it wants to be, and it does exactly that one thing quite well. But probably what I enjoyed the most about it was how well it managed to handle its turn-based battles. So a thing you have to watch out for with turn-based games and things like roguelikes is how long each individual battle is going to take you. Because while longer battles might be okay for like a bigger overall RPG, like say Divinity Original Sin 2 for instance, really long drawn-out battles do not work for a roguelike where the point is multiple runs in relatively quick succession. Like 30 minutes to an hour is kind of what you're looking at there, and having battles that take that long by themselves just isn't going to work. And Rogue Waters manages to walk that line really, really well, with battles actually going pretty quick, while still having a lot of fun mechanics and classes to play around with, as well as even just movement abilities as you jump around the ship, and that's to say nothing of summoning sea monsters in to help you out. Or how you can potentially avoid the battles altogether if you get pretty good at the ship-to-ship combat. And that is pretty much why I thought so highly of Rogue Waters. In fact, I'd say if you're really trying to get a good grasp of what this genre is all about, Rogue Waters is one of those that you need to check out, even if it isn't like the best game of all time, due to its relatively limited scope. But speaking of other great TRPGs, we then have Classified France 44. So Classified France is a historical TRPG, really. We take on the role of the Jedburghs in World War II, which were three-man teams dropped into occupied France, the Netherlands, and Belgium, though in this one we're just focusing on France, of course. And the goal of these teams was simply to soften up Nazi positions ahead of D-Day. And what's more, in this particular game, depending on how well you do throughout the campaign, you'll lead to a bunch of different endings for the game itself. Now, there is the obvious historical outcome, but then there's also others you can also get for the sake of this game. And this is going to see you undertaking various turn-based tactics battles that range the gambit between completely stealth, ideally, or outright combat, on top of also managing a map and the overall resistance you're building in the various areas of France you'll be traveling to, which will then convey you benefits and things as well. So while I wouldn't consider this game like even a TRPG great overall, it really is a fantastic experience, especially one that's rooted in historical events that actually took place, even if it knows where to deviate from those things to keep things interesting. And altogether, that made for another pretty great TRPG. Which does bring us to our final entry on the list, and this one is Sumerian 6, a stealth strategy title from developer Artificer, which is behind another game I really enjoyed, which was Showgunners. But my interest in Sumerian 6 was more around the fact that they were kind of filling a niche that had been left open by the closure of Me Games, who was basically the only company making stealth strategy games, or stealth tactics, if you will. So I was curious to see if they could sort of take up that mantle and honestly keep the genre from completely dying out, hopefully. And while I think a genre like that is probably always going to be niche in some regard, Sumerian 6 is nonetheless a really fantastic iteration of it, and while I would say I think they probably played it a little too safe in terms of the formula that Me Games was already using, it doesn't change the fact that the 6 characters we get a hold of are all really unique and play very differently, and the environments themselves are incredibly interactable, allowing you to set up and perform all these different stunts with all these different characters as you slowly dismantle enemy defenses across a given map in order to pursue our wider goals of tracking down scientists using a mythical substance known as Geiststoff, which is what is fueling all of these supernatural powers in another alt history look at World War II. But if you like your isometric games with a little bit of a stealth focus while still allowing you to sort of do a real time with pause situation, I think Sumerian 6 is a great game in that genre for sure. And I think it will be interesting to see in the future if we ever get any more of them, frankly. But for today, I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up, as that has been a few different hidden gems I've taken a look at over the course of this year. I certainly hope you've enjoyed them. If you've got any others, by all means, drop them down below. Just off the top of my head, I think Drova is probably a game that would have fit a list like this. There's also some other great indies that I specifically didn't include because, honestly, I think they got a fair bit of recognition, and thus they didn't exactly qualify for the hidden part. But either way, let me know what you think about this one one, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.